but I want to officially welcome you to The Glory of Gardening, the Hidden Benefits of Community Gardens. This webinar is being hosted by the Church of the Brethren's Office of Public Witness as part of our Spring Going to the Garden webinar series. Community gardens are an excellent place for growing fruits and veggies, but they can also create space for further personal growth, for healing, and for relationship building. And so we're going to be discussing those themes further tonight. And to guide us through this discussion, we will be hearing from Laura Stone, who is a theologian and church musician, who has most recently been studying at Boston University. Laura brings her experience from Gould Farm, a farm and therapeutic community for adults with mental illness, and from Waltham Fields Community Farms, a Boston CSA that emphasizes urban food access. Then we'll hear from Tom Benevento, who works with New Community Project Spring Village Ecology Center in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Tom's experiences range from having a degree in sustainable systems to having years of practical in the United States and Central America. And then we will hear from Maisha Taylor, who is the manager of the Perlman Place Farm of Civic Works Real Food Farm in Baltimore. Maisha is dedicated to growing food in urban communities and has experience growing in Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and North Carolina. So we'll hear from each of these individuals, and then after each of them has had a time to share, we will open it up to questions that anyone in the audience may have for our presenters or for dialogue points that you might be wanting to share. So with that being said, if Laura wants to go ahead and unmute herself, Tom and Maisha, if you all could stay muted, and Laura can take it away.
All right. Hello, folks. It's an honor to be part of this. Like Katie said, my experience comes primarily from my work at Gould Farm in Massachusetts. That's a therapeutic community for adults with major mental illnesses. And the theory there is that healing comes primarily from three places. One is belonging in a community. A second is meaningful work. And then a third is living close to the land. And so their farm and their garden programs are really central to the healing work that they do. I also worked at a Boston CSA for a little while, and ate from that CSA also. My work while I was there was weeding, which was exciting. And that CSA is especially interested in urban malnutrition, which is, at least in Boston, caused by a lack of access to good food in poorer neighborhoods. And so I enjoyed learning about that. I enjoyed also eating with the seasons, which we did with the CSA. So I likely will not be telling you all anything that you don't know, maybe perhaps reminding you of things that you've felt, and maybe putting some language on that. Some of the spiritual benefits, I've been asked to talk about the spiritual benefits of gardening. One of the main ones that comes to mind is a sense of simplicity and a sense of abundance. I think scarcity fuels our society's economy, especially here in America, and it leaves us feeling like we never have enough. And it intentionally creates desires in us that we can never fulfill, and so we're constantly chasing desires and constantly accumulating things. Alternatively, God always is inviting us into abundance, which is an invitation to cherish the things we have as gifts, and especially cherishing the gifts of the earth. I was watching a previous webinar. A presenter there talked about nature's abundance, how one will create often many fruits, and then each fruit will have many seeds within it. And so abundance is sort of part of nature, but it's an abundance that you can't control. It's an abundance that you can nurture, certainly, and care for. But if you try to control it, it has dire consequences, and in the end, it doesn't really work. So this kind of connection to abundance requires an incredible trust, which I think is a really important spiritual discipline for us, trust in God's providence. And I think it also, although it seems paradoxical, this kind of abundance inspires a loving, cherishing simplicity because it asks us to savor the things that we have and invites us into an awe, which I think makes us more and more content with what we have, trusting that there will be more, that God will provide. The spirituality of gardening. One of the things that I found when I was reading is that I connected with many of the parables of Jesus in a very different way. Many Christian images of courts, like the court judicial system for the life of faith, have a long way in history. Words like justification and atonement and salvation. And I think brethren folk don't often feel as comfortable with those kinds of images for the life of faith. And so better images for us come from the natural world. And as I said, this is how Jesus worked too. The parables of Jesus are most often connected to the natural world. So maybe instead of asking the question, how does a person get saved, maybe Church of the Brethren people tend to want to ask, how does a life of faith grow? And when Jesus was asked that kind of question, what's the kingdom like? What's faith like? He most often talked about growing things. And so I think we can think of the life of faith, as not so different from growing things. There's a planting, and then we're watering and nurturing, sometimes weeding, but a lot of waiting and watching while we nurture. And the goal, I guess, is bearing fruit. But that's not actually the end of it all, because once a fruit, there's also the harvesting, and that harvest then nurtures and seeds. And so it becomes a cyclical sort of thing. I think these are important images to have. And I think as, again, brethren people often, really it's important for us to have our life of faith connect with our bodily life, our physical life. And so the ability to work in the garden and experience those is really important. And I think also these are images that are important for another reason, because they ring especially true, more true than some of the courtroom images, for people who aren't in the normal power structures of society. Though those images resonate, I think, across the board because they're human images, they're natural images. But I think that's an important thing to claim as part of the spiritual benefit of gardening. Another piece of the spiritual benefit of gardening has to do with the rhythm of time. Again, our society tends to think of time as a progression. You're constantly going to the next thing and the next thing, and each thing is building upon the last and moving toward the future. But I think when you start to garden and you start to eat close to the land, you notice time moving in a different way. And I think it is a seasonal thing, it's a cyclical thing, it's a spiral that deepens, not unlike the church calendar, where we come back and back to Lent and Advent and Christmas and Easter, but they're always, although they're familiar, they're always new. And this cyclical time, again, reminds us that we don't have control of time. If time is a progression, we tend to be aiming towards something, and we have this idea that we have control of what happens next. But I think gardening reminds us that we're part of God's time and part of God's joyful creation. So that's another piece of it. And then the final that came to mind, although I'm sure more things will come to mind, and I hope more things will come to mind for you folks also, is that gardening puts us close to the earth, and it connects us to our mortality and to our humanity and to our very being and essence, such that mortality is not something to fear or run away from at all costs. I think we get ourselves in trouble with that sort of fear of mortality. But instead, mortality is held within an understanding of as part of something larger and part of something that moves in, and in which nothing is lost in the cycle. So the death of a plant aids the living of a new plant, perhaps. And so then our humanity is also held within God's providence. I think all of these things are, we sort of feel them in our body in the times when I have been the closest to eating locally, eating seasonally, and being part of farms and gardens. There's been a really visceral, really bodily experience of all of these, that I felt that I was part of something that was both fragile, but also awe-inspiringly unchanging, the same now and forever, but also then every moment, every day, the plants are a little bit different. And I think that's a really humbling and empowering place to be. And I think all of these things are very, very important for the life of faith. I think they really resonate with the life of faith with the theology of Brethren and baptism. So, in case you need to read, I think the four main things that I noticed are the connection between simplicity and abundance and God's providence. Secondly, the images for the life of faith. And third, the rhythm of time. And fourth, a grounded humility and a joyful mortality. And with that, I will close and pass it on to somebody else.
Great. Thank you so much for those wise words, Laura, and for a good grounding for the rest of our discussion. At this point, if Tom is ready to go, then we can go ahead and pass it off to him. And Laura, if you want to be sure and mute your microphone to make sure that we don't get any more crazy echoes, hopefully. But if Tom, if you're ready, then please feel free to go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, just perfectly.
Okay, great. I'm going to be talking more specifically about the connection between interactions of people healing one another and healing the earth. And what we have found in our work, that the urgent need of healing our planet is inextricably bound to healing ourselves. And we just see this over and over again. And I see it in my own personal life when it comes springtime after a long cold winter, and I'm finally getting outside to dig around in the soil and flip things over. And I find myself coming to another level of my own humanity, as Laura talked about. There's this connection that we begin to have in that process of working with the soil and with the land. It's so critical. Gandhi said to dig the earth is to remember our humanity, and we seem to see that often in the kind of work that we do. What I want to say is that as we participate in our own sustenance, we both find a new and enlivening connection to the basic elements of our lives, and the awareness also of sort of the hidden connections that are happening and within the ecosystems, within water and soil and wildlife. So these things sort of come together. And I have a couple of stories that I wanted to share from our experience. We're in Harrisonburg, and we have both a center, sustainable living center, that invites people who have come out of difficult life circumstances, coming off the streets, who've been struggling with addictions, coming out of abusive situations in their relationships. And then we also have, on top of that, we have land connected with 4 houses where we have community gardens and a homestead garden, and we work together. And I just see so many examples of this sort of mutual healing that takes place. One of the gentlemen that started working with us a couple of years ago, he, an older fellow in his mid-60s, and as I got to know him, he started smoking cigarettes when he was 5, started drinking alcohol at the age of 8. So he had this long history of being an alcoholic. And the first day that he showed up working with us, he couldn't stand up. He was just wiped out, still drunk, getting in all kinds of fights. And he kind of laid down on the ground and he started to weed a little bit, you know. He could just barely do anything. And over the past 3 years working with us and working in the gardens, He has begun, I've just seen the transformation of this guy. Like, he has now given up drinking. Like, he's drank for 59 years of his life. In the last 3 years, he hasn't drank at all. And his whole life has been transformed in really interesting ways. Like, he's a person now who is on time. He is really pleasant to be with, and he's like digging in the soil, and he's always wanting to be there. And he's just really this pleasant person who, through a combination of other things, but with working outside in the garden, like, it's now become a part of his own identity as his own. Through the wintertime, he's calling me like, when's the garden going to start up? I need to get out there again. And it's just been really fun to see this remarkable transformation in this particular person. We started some community gardens around neighborhoods in Harrisonburg that are often sort of left to the edges. And we found a piece of land next to a church that was not being used, and we thought, let's organize to start a community garden there. And we did some investigation around seeing if there were people in the area that could really use land to grow some food for themselves and even for their neighbors. And we found this large apartment complex, very high dense apartment complex with just a giant parking lot on it. And all these folks were from Central America who had newly arrived as immigrants to work in the poultry factories, but were really interested in gardening because they had no land to do it, and they'd been traditionally involved in that. And once we started contacting people and talking to them about the idea, they got so excited. We started with 16 plots the first year. And the very next year, we went up to 46. And now I think there's, 150 plots. And I remember as we were organizing this, I get this call from this guy. He says, "Yo tengo que sembrar porque somos de la tierra," which means that I have to plant, I have to garden because we are of the earth. This whole identity of a relationship with the land was so tied up in this particular gentleman's life. And it was a real honor to see that and be a part of that kind of connection with other people. Wendell Berry talks about gardening, and he says, one of the most revolutionary acts that U.S. citizens can be involved with is growing food. So we see not only the healing of ourselves, but the healing of a environmental crisis that's so critical that we need to be involved with at this point. And doing the simple act of reconnecting with where our food comes and where, the dynamics of how the food is actually grown and how it's affecting the soil and the land is so crucial. And as we get closer to the access to it and the sustenance of it, and to see these parts coming together, one of the primary techniques that we use is called permaculture, which is a kind of agriculture or a kind of system that imitates ecological systems. And so we follow some of the principles within ecosystems to design the kind of gardening that we do so that we're not only healing ourselves but healing the planet. Some of these would be following closed loop systems. In our community gardens, we have the food that we grow. Some of it stays on site, but then we also sell it to different parts of the city, to different restaurants and the public schools, and we sell it to what's called a grind shaft, which is a place that receives people just coming out of prison. But what we notice is that all this produce that we sell, the nutrients are lost. They're going off from, the plants are taking up nutrients in the garden, and then they're stored in the plants, and then we ship them off with our bicycles to deliver them. All these nutrients are being lost. So what we do is we have three times a week, we come with our bicycles with these big trailers, and we go and pick up all the food scraps from these places, and we bring it back to our site, and we have these long windrow compost systems that turn those nutrients back into fertility for our gardens again. So this is one of those principles of ecosystems that we try to imitate, of a closed loop fertility cycle. It's so important. There's a number of stories that I could share with you. Now, maybe I'll just close with one more story of how the healing power of being with the earth is something remarkable to see. we started some gardens with one gentleman who had been a man living under a bridge around town here. Met him along pushing a bicycle in really rough shape. Invited him to come garden with us. And this is a guy who had kind of next to nothing. And he started working with us. And I noticed he had like 3 coats on. He would never take them off. And even though as the spring unfolded, it got hotter and hotter, he continued to wear his coats. And I realized, that's what he's got on is everything he owns. So he didn't want to take that off and potentially lose something. But as he worked with another gardener named a woman, and he started to learn about her and her situation with a couple of children who are fostered, who she's trying to take care of and sending money, and she's on the streets moving from one place to the other. And as we're working along, a couple of weeks later, this guy who has next to nothing, he pulls me aside and says, I'd like to take the income that I'm earning from working here, and I want to secretly have it go to her, to this other woman who has a higher need than I do. And I think about my own life, and I haven't done that yet. Like my earnings, I'll start passing it on to someone I'm gardening with. So I was very inspired by that. There's some things happening while we're working together outside with the soil, gardening, that is inspirational to our own healing and the healing of others. That's been a real pleasure to be a part of. So I think from that point, I will maybe look for some questions later on.
Thank you so much, Tom. And if you want to go ahead and turn off your microphone, and then we can pass things on to Maisha.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, Maisha, go ahead.
Hey, yeah. So, first I want to say thanks to everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate you guys taking your time to listen to what we have to say and hopefully share anything from your experience. So pretty much, I just want to share some guiding principles that I've seen work while doing urban agriculture. I started agriculture in Baltimore working with youth. So I have this presentation up. I don't know if you can see it. Can anybody see it?
I am still frozen, so Laura, weigh in on that. Yes, I can see it. Yeah.
All right, cool. So I'm going to start with the first slide. So through all the urban ag that I've done in North Carolina, Baltimore, and D.C., one of the proven models that I've seen is the learning by leading model in the community. I'm starting with the youth. So in this picture, I have members of the Young Farmers Club. It's a club that I started at a local community center for youth in grades 2 through 8. And pretty much they learned how to garden. And while they're learning how to garden, they started teaching other people how to garden or making smoothies. So in this picture, they're showing some of the adult counselors how to make farm to fork smoothies using some of the produce from the garden. This has worked with adults as well. I worked with some adults with disabilities in North Carolina, and they participated in harvesting produce from the gardening. And, as I'm working with the coordinator of the program, I'm like, okay, besides them getting experience with, cooking with food and harvesting, what other skills are they developing? And she said that when you work with people with special needs, you get to do things by using their hands. They're improving their motor skills. So when you work with those populations, you can use the garden to improve their motor skills. They also were learning how to self-express. So a lot of the recipes that I did with them, I like to have them harvest, massage the kale, or cut the carrots and touch the food, and they felt confident about what they were doing, because a lot of times in communities, people might lack the confidence behind doing things, and I feel like the garden is a place where you can learn by mistake, and it's somewhere that you won't be judged. I'm not one who goes to church, but I say that the garden is the best teacher, and I look to it as a relationship with God. Another example of using gardening in community, it can encourage self-determination. So, with working with the youth, they created an entrepreneur program through gardening and their own business called Mighty Green, and we allow the students, or we encourage the students to self-determine, to name themselves. So they came up with their business name, they came up with the things that they wanted to grow, it's on their tagline, and we just supported them through that. About working with community, it's letting things be culturally appropriate and also allowing them to do what they feel, it's what they feel like they want to do. So when you allow people, they take more ownership of what's going on instead of going in and saying, oh, I want to have a lot of eggplant, and they don't like eggplant, so they don't take ownership of weeding it or watering it or wanting to learn how to cook with it. This is a really cool resource. So if you have, or know anyone who has food stamps and you're trying to start a community garden, you can use your EBT to purchase seeds from the grocery store. So a way that people can pool together their resources to start a garden without, having to dig too far in their pockets or apply for grants to get seeds. I thought this was something really cool. Myself and some other urban farmers are thinking about doing a pilot for this in some communities. Here is a slide. Farmers Club, we have a group of, so as I mentioned, having 8, and we wanted to inspire the older children's leadership, so we allowed them to be junior leaders. And then being the junior leaders, they help the younger children create the rules. So in this picture, we have Alexis, one of our junior leaders, leading the lesson. When I worked with high school students in the past, I taught them how to write curriculum. Curriculum until I was an adult. I realized that, writing curriculum is a transferable skill. A lot of students express interest in becoming educated. By teaching them those skills and letting them take that lead early on, I feel like when they become an adult or as they go on their learning journey, this is a skill that they could take with them that could make them a more advantageous candidate for any future jobs. This slide here, it's about growing in alternative spaces. The first slide is a picture of a tennis shoe. It's an organization, the Green Scheme, and they work in public housing neighborhoods to develop community gardens, teach people how to grow food. And this was a way that they engage their community by growing in a pair of sneakers that youth really like. So making gardening attractive. And in those sneakers, they also learn basic carpentry skills, so how to use power drills and how much soil you need. And this is just a picture of a sunflower growing in the shoe. It actually grew up to be about 6 feet tall. And if you're growing in spaces that you don't have a lot of, use things like pallets or car tires or potato sacks, suitcases, bathtubs, thinking outside of the box and letting people play with their creativity. Here are some methods that I've seen work as far as engaging volunteers. So in the Park Heights Community Health Alliance in West Baltimore, they have a sweat equity model. And one of the things that I think is really cool is that people volunteer their time over of a week, so you can volunteer as much as 2 hours up to 10 hours, and then the following week you get to participate in the TSA. So for like every hour that you volunteer, maybe that's a share of produce. You get a bunch of carrots for volunteering for 2 hours. So to kind of engage that community who can't afford to eat organically or purchase to participate in the TSA, which for anyone who isn't familiar, the TSA stands for Supported Agriculture, meaning in the beginning of the season you take risks with the farm, say $275, sometimes $500, and for the course of 10 to 22 weeks you get 10 items of produce that you can either pick up or get delivered to your home. So to allow people who may not come from income to still participate and get fresh produce and learn how to garden. And then another one is providing community service. So a lot of youth around the nation, they need community service hours to graduate. So one of the things we like to do is offer those community service hours for volunteering on the farm, possibly giving them some professional development, writing recommendations for them. And then the last one is internships. When creating an internship, you pretty much sit down with, or even an adult, and they're trying to develop basic job skills, so how to do an interview, record keeping, maybe making phone calls, helping to write newsletters, and then at the end they have that skill set which they can go on and possibly get a job. So another thing about community engagement is relying on creating collaborative partnerships. So I noticed when I started the Young Farmers Club in Baltimore, it started with myself being an after-school teacher at a community center, and at the time, Real Food Farm was just another program of civic work, and we partnered together. I had an experience being an educator, and they had the technical support. They had the greenhouse. They had the person who actually was experienced. We came together to facilitate this for the youth. And then I'm working with the Center for Environmental Systems and Goldsboro Park Association, as well as LifeScape, which was the organization for adults with special needs. We all came together. Goldsboro Parks and Rec, they had the facility with the kitchen. They also had the relationship with that organization, as a lot of parks and recs are local. They have expanded partnerships that SEF didn't have. Me being a part of SEF, I was able to come in and bring things like the ceiling on my expertise. And even for 1 hour a week, I was able to do free gardening, interactive gardening and cooking classes for a series of 12 weeks. So I would say if you are part of, any organization that works with a variety of different demographics, have a skill set, and it's a way that you guys can meet without, having to pull too much things out of your budget or go too far and beyond, then this is a great way to engage the community just by using the resources that you already have. And then the last thing, it can't be fun unless people unify, and most times people unify through food, through music, through laughter, through fun, and different things. So in the garden, kind of using the garden as a way to do different things. So one thing that when I was in North Carolina, was having a sunflower seeds party. So having it was a sunflower seeds, they had people come out and eat sunflower seeds, or cookouts, or doing different food demos, or maybe having a storytelling for the youth in the garden where they are a garden related book and maybe taste the food or do textures, or have a scavenger hunt where they go look for bugs. Youth and adults, a lot of people are very inquisitive, and once you're in nature, you kind of get sucked in. I felt in field fellowship is a really good way to engage different people, especially intergenerations, so the elders could tell the stories, and maybe the youth, they could read to other youth. Pretty much what I have to share. If you have any other questions, that's definitely open.
Great. Thank you so much, Aisha. At this time, you can notice that there is a chat bar on your screen. And so if you have any questions, then feel free to go ahead and presenters. I am still frozen, so I can't see if anyone asked the question. So if someone does, then if you could just read it out so everyone can see it, and then whoever wants to answer can go ahead and answer. Presenters, if you all were struck by something that someone read and want to respond to that, then feel free to take that time to do so as well.
Tom, I have to say I was struck by, you talked about the very understanding that gardening is revolutionary, and that kind of relationship between that and the healing and personal and interpersonal healing. And then Maisha, I feel like the things that you were talking about were really kind of revolutionary in the sense of changing things for people. I'm wondering, I would love to hear either or both of you talk more about that edge of it, if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I would want to share. First of all, I really appreciated what both Maisha and Laura, you both had to say, and I just appreciate that you're making this happen. This is such a rich sort of engagement here that we're having. The notion around Wendell-Berry's sense of revolution, it is true that I found sort of the personal revolution that takes place by starting to be involved in working with the earth and with the soil, and then seeing that almost contagiously rubbing off on other people as they come and work with what we're doing. There's so many youth in particular coming and working with us, and some of what Maisha talked about, where you have sort of alternative ways of getting people involved with. We have all kinds of students. We have people who are court-ordered and see these sort of transformations. We had some two students who were, I guess they got in trouble and they had to do some community service, and they joined in our work. Both of them studying business and sort of liking it a lot, but they started working in the garden with all of us, and there was a revolution that took place with the two of them that they got so excited about it. They started bringing their friends over, and then I met one of them about a year later over at the university, and he pulled me aside and said, I just totally changed my whole major. I'm in doing environmental stuff and social work kinds of things and looking at bigger issues. And it was this revolution that I saw in this one particular guy just by the interaction of other people who were very engaged in working on healing the earth. And it began to heal him and get him excited about something he had no idea, which was really fun to watch. But I also think it's really important that as we get involved personally, that it's not really enough in terms of the healing that we need to have take place with the earth. We really need to form or space in which others can be invited in and encouraged and work on these bigger structures that need to change, because some of the issues like climate change are so urgent that we need to be really planning and strategizing on a level that's structural and systemic. And that's where I think Wendell-Berry also calls this question of revolution, that it goes beyond just our own lives. It goes much further.
Thank you for expanding on that, Tom, and thank you for framing it, Laura. I'm assuming that no one has come in at this point. So do any of you all have any other comment to share about your experiences or to bounce off the other folks?
I'm curious to know what type of our people who are participating in the webinar had in gardening and community gardening, and what how this information could benefit them, or if it isn't benefiting them.
All right, so that's a question to our viewers. So, folks who are listening in, how has this information influenced you at this point? And how do you hope that it can continue to impact you? All right. Has anyone had anything? And at this point, I apologize for things.
I don't see anything on my end.
All right. So maybe that could be something for our viewers to consider and contemplate. But for now, can go ahead and say thank you, Laura, nice. And for our viewers, if you want to continue this conversation, then you can send me an email at kfurrow@aaron.org, and I can get you in touch with any of the three presenters. If you are interested in receiving continuing education units for participating in this webinar, then you can also send an email to me at that same email address. Otherwise, thank you again to all of our presenters and to our viewers for listening in. And I hope you all have a good evening.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thank
Feel
you.
free to contact me if you have any additional questions, comments. I'm open my email address is on the screen. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland, so if you are in the DMV, I encourage you to come out and check us out at Real Food Farm. We have volunteer days on Thursdays from 4 to 7 and on every Saturday from 9 to 12.
Yeah, and I also encourage you out to Harrisonburg, Virginia, if you're in that area. We have volunteer days Thursdays in the gardens. We'd be happy to have a tour of our site, culture systems we can place, and love any of your input or experiences through what we're doing. So thanks again.
All right, thank you all so much. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.